Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Vazadeh.
And you have yet another success story
just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show. You guys, I have an amazing guest on today with us. His name is Jon Waldman. Jon, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The title of today's show is Swimming Aimlessly, Men and Infertility with Jon Waldman. I'm going to read his bio right now. Jon Waldman is a Winnipeg-based writer. His most recent book, 100 Things Jet Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, was shortlisted for the Winnipeg Book Award in 2015. He has spoken at TEDx Winnipeg and the United Kingdom's National Infertility Awareness Week and has been interviewed by the CBC and Huffington Post, among others. His work has also appeared in the Winnipeg Free Press, the Hockey News, and the Toronto Sun. And in 2009, Jon and his wife, Ilana, embarked on a 6-year journey through infertility, which concluded in July 2015 with the birth of their daughter, Kaya. Jon is a spokesperson for Fertility Matters Canada, and I'm so glad to have him on his show. Jon, welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you again.
So Jon, you've written an amazing book about male infertility. What is Swimming Aimlessly about?
Swimming aimlessly is, simply put, the struggle that men go through as they are dealing with infertility, be it male factor, female factor, combination thereof. Really, when I was going through our fertility struggle, I found that there weren't a lot of outlets, specifically for men, for me to approach. So as I started to get involved in Fertility Matters, then known as the Infertility Awareness Association of Canada, I started to look at opportunities to increase the conversation for men. Thankfully now, through the efforts of multiple people, there are more outlets than ever between podcasts, Facebook groups, other avenues, but it was definitely, at the time I felt that I needed to do something, and eventually just went through a couple different channels and got to the book process. And the book not only talks about my family story and the struggles that I went through, but also speaks with a number of patients across the globe, speaks with experts in the field, and really I tried to make it as much of an all-purpose guide to how men struggle to cope with infertility as I could.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I know you speak about how men tend to stay quiet about infertility. Why is it so hard for men to talk about it?
I think there's two main factors. First of all, men are by nature quiet when it comes to things that are outside of comfort areas of discussion, things that are more pedestrian like sports or home improvement, things like that. But the other factor is that we are also positioned to be the rock in the relationship, that women obviously go through things very differently than men do, and they go through arguably more than men do, on a physical level as well as the emotional level. But because of that, we're expected to be the rock. We're expected to just sort of shut down everything and just be there. What that leads to, though, is that we don't deal with what we are struggling with. So the mental health issues, the relationship issues that we go through, the struggles that we have with friends, with family. So when you have all that and you combine that with the already existing conditions where men don't talk at the best of times, you're left with virtually a Molotov cocktail of danger that men go through when you're dealing with infertility.
Those are all great points. And in your own story, you shared that you used a pseudonym when you were interviewed. I'm curious what that pseudonym is, and in your experience, when were you able to share your journey publicly, including on the radio?
The pseudonym that I used was Greg, and it was just a very simple name. I didn't obviously wanted to keep something as far away from my identity as possible, without going to anything that would make me sound really bizarre. But to me, when I started to talk, it was extremely difficult, and I pull no punches with it. It took me a long time to talk even to my wife, but she was the first person I spoke to as I was trying to get through things, because as so many couples do, there were issues that started to pop up. From there, I just sort of took a small path. I started to talk to friends and family, um, and I started to talk in the support group that we were in. And as I started to talk in the support group, the organizer said, would you be willing to do a couple radio interviews? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? Because I'd already done a few through my jobs, through some of the other book promos that I was doing at the time. I didn't know how quickly it was going to be that I was going to be doing one, because about 2 weeks after I said that, yeah, sure, I'll do one, they said, okay, we've got one lined up for you. So it was nerve-wracking to say the least, to really be going into that frame where I had been before, but in a much more personal light. It was extremely hard to do, but I just had to do it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did, and I'm glad you're here, and I'll be sharing your book with all my patients in the future. And in your
Thank
book,
you.
you also talk about the miscarriage that you and your wife
Hmm.
experienced, and I'm sorry that you had that experience. You talk about how the attention needs to turn to care, both for your partner and for yourself. And I know that men experience a lot of pain when a partner is diagnosed with a pregnancy that ends in a miscarriage, but it's not something that gets talked about a lot. What can you share about the male experience of miscarriage for our listeners?
Um, because we went through two miscarriages, there were two very different uh, ways that I dealt with it. The first one, I honestly, I just froze when we got the that sort of somber tone in our doctor's voice. We already knew that there was complications, and we went in uh, for an exam, and he said that, yeah, that we had lost the pregnancy, and I honestly was not ready for that. I mean, we were at that point, we were already struggling to conceive in the first place. It had been about 8 or 9 months until we were able to have a success. Um, and then to have that 8 weeks into the pregnancy, I literally could not do anything else but stand beside my wife, hold her hand, and my memory just completely blanks out after that. It almost feels like post traumatic, to have gone through that, and then the last memory I have after that is sitting in our car and saying, what are we going to do next? The unfortunate thing for me was that I was new to a job. I was less than a week into a new job, so I couldn't just, I felt like I couldn't just tell my boss, hey, this is what happened. So I really did not do a good job of dealing with it. And I think that that's more common for men, especially on the first time around. You don't know how to react, even if you've had struggles, even if your first conception is through ART, then you're still thinking like, okay, what do we do next? And there is no roadmap to say what exactly you should do. Um, the second time around, because this was a try for a second child, it was, in some ways, it was a little bit more manageable, but I also found that I was more physically upset, and I cried a lot more the second time around, because I had already gone through this process of letting my emotions out and describing what I was going through. So it made it easier to be, I guess, more there in that sense, and be able to be emotive. But I also found that because this was now a different situation where we had gone back for a second IVF, and everything seemed to have been going properly, and then to have it fail was a much different scenario, and as a result, the reaction was much different. And just in general, I think that guys are like stars, or what have you. That everybody is unique, and everybody reacts a little bit differently. Some guys will resort to the anger. Some guys will resort to immediate sadness, go through the various grieving stages, either quicker or slower than others. And I think that that's one of the things that has to be talked about, is how men do cope a little bit differently than women do, and how we will sometimes just shut down immediately and put everything onto our partners, because let's face it, when you're a female and you have a miscarriage, you have both the emotional side and the physical side. Men don't have the physical side, so we're a little bit more scrambling in our mentality, and we're also by nature problem solvers for the most part. So we start to cycle through, okay, what's the next step? And we do that almost immediately to try to get some sort of semblance, try to get a little bit of normalcy going on in our brains as well.
And what helped you get through the pain and the loss and those feelings that you had?
Honestly, there wasn't a lot that helped me the first time around because I was so fixated on doing everything I could for my wife. I was really, I was already um, dealing with mental health issues from an earlier age, and this definitely triggered a lot more emotions and a lot more feelings of depression, anxiety, of shortcomings than than I, than it was the second time. And I think that what ultimately helped me was when we go back for consultations and we start to look at what are the options, and you can start to roadmap it a little bit. Unfortunately, because there are so many methods, and you hear the not so helpful advice of you got pregnant once, you can get pregnant again, that puts it a little bit further behind because okay, we can get pregnant, it's staying pregnant that's the issue. So and it's the same thing for so many people that I've spoken to is that when you go through something for the first time, it's complete, you don't know how to react, and often you don't ever really get over it. And it took me so long, because it was only the start of what ended up being a 5 to 6 year journey. Once we had our daughter, everything felt a lot better, but it still resonated, and you still have those trigger moments where you think back to that first failed pregnancy, or you think back to what might have been a chemical pregnancy, or anything like that. So you start to second guess a lot of things, and you start to look internally and see, okay, what did I not do right? What could I have done differently, and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately for a lot of people, not just men in general, but you start to look at, you obviously don't play the external blame game, but you play the internal blame game a lot. And that's something that is never healthy. I think it's something that a lot of people don't address enough. And I think that's one of the things that isn't done enough is that immediate support that is made available through the medical community. There's, when we were going through processes here, one of the things that we had to do as part of ART was we had to speak with a local counselor who specialized in couples who are dealing with approaching IVF, etc. But really what there needs to be that point where somebody, as soon as they have that failed pregnancy, there has to be that resource available to them right away, that there's a therapist ready, that there's a counselor ready, or that someone can at least start to direct you to the outlets, because we didn't know about the Infertility Awareness Association. We didn't know if there are any Facebook groups available or anything like that. So I think that that's something that really needs to be focused on a lot more by the medical community.
Mm-hmm. So you've shared a lot about, your experiences, but can you tell us a little bit more about what you experienced navigating the world of infertility and what surprised you from your perspective?
I think what surprised me, the first thing that surprised me is how common it is. You're looking in Canada at the statistics being 1 in 6 couples or individuals who are struggling to conceive for a year plus. So that was certainly something that opened my eyes a lot. What also opened my eyes is how your relationships are affected, because at first you sort of think, to have a miscarriage is fairly common. It's 25% of the population has had a miscarriage, at least one. But when you start to have those conversations, or you hear, the oopsies, or you hear the oh, it just took me and my husband one time, and then we were pregnant, and you see the frustration build. You feel the agony that starts to build up inside you of, okay, I just want to shut the rest of the world up and duck away. Don't invite me to baby showers, to first birthdays, or anything like that. Fortunately, guys don't have to deal with as many of those events as women do, but it still hurts. And I think that there was that's one of the factors, is that guys do hurt. When somebody in the office announces that they're pregnant, it hits guys who are going through infertility just as much as women do, and it really hit me pretty hard, because it's you feel like you're starting to see baby bumps all around you, or you're seeing the babies or us flyers popping up all over the place and things like that, and you become so much more aware of everything that can be and will be baby family related. And even something as simple as, for me, celebrating Hanukkah, for other people celebrating Christmas, or whatever the case may be, all those family oriented holidays become that much tougher to be part of. And it's something that I still mourn. I've had friends that had babies before us, because we weren't at the point where we were starting to try, but they were at the second child while we were going through our infertility struggle. And I mourned that I wasn't able to be there more for my friends, or for the families that were that had already been calling us Uncle Johnny, etc. And I feel like it was time lost. But for the friends that I learned were my true friends, the time is made up one way or another.
Yeah.
You might miss the video where their kid walks the first time, but eventually, you go to a couple soccer games, or you spend more time with them on weekends and things like that, when you feel like that you are ready to. But really, you learn very quickly who those true friends are, whether it's friends, family, or new people that you meet through the infertility struggles that you do. And I think that is the biggest outcome. Certainly for couples, but I think for men as well.
Yeah. And you also write about the importance of keeping your sense of humor and levity, which is something I loved about your book. And I tried my hardest to also keep things light, even though fertility obviously is a really serious topic. What have you discovered about humor and infertility? And do you have any stories to share?
I think that the first thing that you learn very quickly is that any sort of censor you have goes right out the window, because if things like ejaculation, like basal thermometers, like sex, like all those kind of things start to become part of your dialogue, it blends into your humor. I think the term that I use is, you go from the ABC TGIF to Comedy Central in a moment's notice. And it's true. I think that people who have gone through infertility, because you've gone through this traumatic experience, anybody will tell you that laughter is the best medicine. And the best way to deal with infertility is, to be able to not necessarily laugh at your situation, but to be able to keep a dialogue that has those light sides to it. And the most amazing thing to me was, not just in my house, but as I saw in a couple of Reddit forums, that for whatever reason, women gravitated towards the 16 and pregnant style shows. And I just couldn't fathom it. But then you start to see that you're looking at it and you're laughing at it in a way. It becomes almost as much of a dose of humor as a sitcom does. And in speaking with some of the people that I did, Karen Jeffries, for example, who runs the Hilariously Infertile social, and has done a book as well, and a couple of the TV writers that I've spoken with, everybody says, that the best way for us to deal with these traumatic things is to be able to laugh about it and to bring out that humor. I told myself that at some point I want to be able to do a stand-up routine out of this whole thing. COVID hasn't allowed me to do that during the book launch, but it'll happen at some point or another. And I think that's really, when you're going out with couples who are going through the same thing, you have the sort of the usual mundane conversation, but then you get into the humor of it. And I retold the story of the lights out moments when I was doing the swim up test. I've had people that's had all sorts of maladies that you can't help but laugh at. So I think that really, it's in those shared experiences, and really being able to laugh at something the same way that you would if somebody was let go from their job, or somebody had in university had a bad exam or something like that. Eventually you do get to laugh at it. I think just with infertility, you laugh a little bit quicker, especially if you can get into those group situations where you can talk with other people who are in the similar situations that you are.
That's great. And what advice do you have for handling the stress that infertility can bring to a marriage?
I think the most important thing And it's so hard to, it's easy to say, so hard to do, but it is to talk. And it took me too long to do it, but as soon as I did it, I started to feel better, and it was gutting to actually go through it. I was bawling like a baby, and I mean, it's my family's genes. We're criers from the start, but I think that most men are afraid to cry in front of their spouses and afraid to cry in front of the people that mean the most to them. But really, you have to be ready to do that. You have to be able to do that. And if it takes going, speaking to a third party first, speaking either to a counselor individually or as a couple, and I do recommend both avenues. And I found it helpful to have my own sessions and then to have our sessions as a couple. I think that there is a lot of benefits to that and to getting to that preparatory stage where you can start to talk to other people. But I think the most important thing is to discuss, because the last thing that you want to do is for anybody to feel like they don't have a voice or have a say. This is still a 50-50 partnership between a husband and a wife or whatever the couple may be. It's ultimately not one person can decide it, and because the last thing that you want is for anybody to feel grudgingly about it later. I had a confidant who came to me and said, we're not sure what to do about our issue because my wife doesn't want to go through IVF. And honestly, if she doesn't want to go through it, you don't go through it. You can go through adoption, you can go through surrogacy, you can try IUI and other procedures. So there are different ways to go about it depending on what your comfort level is. But if both of you aren't expressing your concerns, and if both of you aren't expressing what your limits are, there's a lot that's lost, and there starts to be a mistrust. And I think that really, if anything's going to get accomplished, that you just have to speak up, as hard as it is to do.
Thank you for that. And you and your wife eventually conceived and have a daughter, Kaya. Congratulations. What would you share with those people who are hoping to grow their family and have experience in fertility?
I think the number one thing that people have to know is that it comes down to what you're willing to do, and be comfortable with what you're willing to do. The example that I just gave of the couple that didn't want to do IVF, they can explore things like adoption. We explored adoption ourselves when we were going through the process, and ultimately decided it wasn't for us because while it could be something in the end that we would do, it wasn't something that we were ready to do from the start because we wanted to try a couple of the ART routes first. But ultimately, you have to know what your goal is, what you're willing to sacrifice, both emotionally, financially, relationship-wise, what you put your bodies through, and that can be applicable for both men and women. The stereotypes that I learned very easily was that there was then, and I saw this in one article, that men don't like to be examined, so therefore there hasn't been a lot of research into male factor infertility, which was completely absurd because everybody that I spoke to said that if it means that I'm going to be able to have a kid, you can do whatever you need. So ultimately, you have to be able to go through to be able to put everything you have and everything that you want to do and everything that you're willing to do into it. If there's something that you don't want to do, don't feel the pressure to do it. There are alternate routes more than ever for what ways you can go about it.
That's great. So now that you've shared your story with the world, you've written this book, so many people will learn for you. What does that feel like for you?
I don't even think it's sunk in really. I mean, we're having this conversation in the middle of February, and the book has started to come out. The obviously people like yourself have read it, but it hasn't been on bookshelves yet. It will be March 30th. But I think that to me, it's all the progression. It's what I wanted to do. When I started to do my interviews, I knew that it was going to lead to eventually doing a national interview. When I started to do national interviews, I knew that there was enough of a voice where I would be able to do things. And ultimately, I wanted the book to be my end goal, along with the speaking opportunities, the opportunities to speak to so many people around it. And the route that I took was going through TEDx, and it's something that I would honestly encourage for anybody that is pursuing any book, whether you're doing it on infertility, whether you're doing it on relationships, etc. See if you can do a TED Talk. It was the most frustrating experience of my life because I am an off-the-cuff speaker by nature. I go on media and I'm not, and I'm asked to rattle off facts about the Jets or facts about whatever the subject matter may be, and I can do that without any hesitation. But to go through the TED process where you're scripted, where you're building in a PowerPoint, where you're building in all these assists and doing it within a 10 to 15 minute window of time, you're really putting yourself under the gun and saying, okay, can I actually do this? Ultimately, the answer was I could, and TED gave me the footing to know that yes, I could go on and rattle on, not just for the couple thousand words that it was as part of my TED Talk, but to be able to do it for 65,000 words that is my book. And it also, what it also did was it improved my standing in the community. It gave me, it opened up the door for a couple more interviews, like Huffington Post, to go internationally, and then to slowly build up to that next level. Everybody talks about how they progress in their careers. They start at the bottom and they move quickly up one way or another. This is what it is for me, and it's the progression that I couldn't be happier about. It's scary as all heck, because there are certain stories in the book that I know are going to get more attention than others. But you know what? That's the nature of it. I had to be open, I had to be honest, and I had to tell my story, and I had to tell my family story, and then share the experiences that other people have had. And honestly, without the interviews that I did, the book would not be where it is. I was lucky, our male factor was limited to having low motility in my sperm. Still livable, but it was still something I improved. But the tales that people told me, like Mike Heller, Vince Londini, and others, it really shaped the book. And I can't thank everybody enough who participated in the book in one way or another, because it gave me the opportunity to do what I wanted to do, to tell a full story. And I think that's one of the most intimidating things, is that I can't just talk about my experience. I have to talk about the full experience of what infertility is, and as many of the different routes as possible.
Yeah. And you're also a spokesperson for Fertility Matters Canada. What is their mission, and what work do you do with them?
Ultimately, Fertility Matters Canada looks to provide support, awareness, and to act up on behalf of their membership, both patients and professionals, in getting movements done. One of the big things in Canada is that and everybody loves to talk about the healthcare system in Canada, that, hey, healthcare is free. Guess what isn't free? IVF. So you're still paying, the 5 figures that you are in the States and in other areas. So there's a lot of advocacy that happens. And I've worked in a number of different functions with FMC. I was a member of the board of directors for a couple years. I was a spokesman first, and will always be a spokesperson for the cause, because it's something that is near and dear to my heart, both in the conversations around fertility specifically, but also in discussions about mental health. So when I was part of Movember, for example, I let them know that, hey, mental health is the focus for me. The cancers that are part of that movement are obviously important to me, but the mental health is where I fit in. And to be able to speak as a representative of FMC as part of Movember was fantastic. And I really feel like the reason why I've kept doing it is because every time I talk, someone talks back to me. Someone comes back to me with their story or the friend's story or something like that. And that's the case with everybody at FMC, is that there are so many stories to be told, and there's so many conversations to be had, that you need to have those they need to be on an ongoing basis. And I find that the more awareness there is, be it through fertility clinics, be it through counselors, be it through simple conversations on Facebook, that everybody grows. And it's the same thing that is done across the world. You can talk about Resolve in the States, Fertility Network in the UK, South Africa, Australia. Every country has a resource available. And if there isn't one in where you are, highly recommend doing some research and finding those spaces, because there are so many resources. And if you look at what FMC does, is that, we're Canada focused, but there's conversations that can happen outside of Canada as well.
Yeah. So where can we find your book? Tell us.
You can find it for. I'm gonna be honest that this is a trying time for the book industry. Not just from the publishing standpoint, where my book was originally supposed to come out November 2020, but now is coming out in March 2021 because of COVID delays. But with the various delays and with the shutdowns that have happened, local bookstores are suffering, and many have closed. If you don't have a local bookstore, go to my local bookstore, mcnallyrobinson.ca, and you can order there. Amazon, I'm never going to say don't order from Amazon, don't order from Barnes & Noble online, don't order from Chapters Indigo, but at the roots, try to find it at your bookstore first, and then go through there. And I'm going to be listing as many of the places as possible through my social media accounts. And if you have any trouble, you can definitely go to simonandschuster.com or simonandschuster.ca to learn more about where it's available in your area, or order directly from the publisher.
Great, thank you. So I want to do a quick male fertility round. Are you ready for this?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. Okay, phone, front or back pocket?
The urban legend is that back pockets, it can have some effects, but often you're predisposed to a condition. So put it in your back pocket or put it in your coat pocket to be a little bit extra safe, given that there still are frequencies that can do damage in other areas.
Tidy whities, yes or no?
Depends on how quickly you want to boil up. The first time that I ever heard that one was on King of the Hill, of all places. I personally go briefs, and most men I know go briefs. And it can if it's prolonged times that you're doing it. If you're wearing them during the day and at night, that's probably not the best for many reasons. But I would say, just go briefs and let the boys roam free.
Love it. Distance biking, good or bad?
Distance biking can be very good in the sense that it gives you that ultimate stress relief. And I say this as somebody who has done 45-minute to 2-hour bikes at a time. But make sure that you're properly equipping yourself. It's the same thing as if you're going out to play baseball, wear a cup or wear padded shorts. And there's so many great communities where you can find for biking comfortably. The banana seats don't have to be the final spot where you're resting.
Sauna, jump in or pass?
The schwitz, as my community calls it. It is good in short spurts, only a couple minutes. And yes, the feeling of getting that sweat out and getting that little bit of a detox feeling is great, but don't cook.
Protective cup, do or don't?
Do. Always do. I learned that the hard way after taking a couple shots in road hockey, where you think you don't need it, but it hurts like hell. Leaving aside fertility and everything like that, there is no reason to never wear a cup whenever you're doing some sort of athletic pursuit.
Thank you, Jon, for coming on and talking to us about swimming aimlessly, men and infertility. We appreciate you so much for bringing awareness to such an important topic.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the platform to share it, and I look forward to future conversations.
Thank you, Jon.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer.
Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abazadeh.
And you have yet another success story.
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.